I've waited a long time to tell my personal paranormal stories or experiences, but by doing so now, I want to convey to people that these things exist and they really do affect people of all walks of life. The following stories took place between 2002 and 2007. I have several experiences that occurred after these, but I'll share those in a different video and at another time. I consider these to be my formative experiences, and these events helped shape my views on the paranormal and the world. I've also asked my family members for their perspectives as well to coincide with what I remember. So with that all being said, I started life out in a city called Derby here in Kansas. I was about 9 years old when the first happenings began. My family consisted of my mom and dad, myself, my younger sister, and brother. Moving from Meadowlark Place to another neighborhood, we had moved across town from one house to another. This one was a duplex-style house on Willow Street, not too far from my grandparents' house, about 2 blocks over or so, which was really nice to be able to ride my bike back and forth and play with my cousin and see them all and, that good stuff. Things up until this point had been semi-normal. Life ebbs and flows, and my parents' relationship certainly had its share of ups and downs, but we all looked forward to this new chapter in our lives. Once we were finally moved in, from the first night we stayed overnight at the house, I began to experience things that I still can't explain. That first night, as I laid in my room asleep, all of a sudden something poked or pushed my arm. Now, my sister had her own room across the hall from me, and my brother was small enough to still be sleeping with my parents the majority of the time. So initially, thinking it was one of them, I opened my eyes, but when I did this, I saw a little boy, but it wasn't anyone that I recognized. And aside from this, the child looked very strange. He was like a pale, glowing blue color and didn't move when I noticed him. He just kept staring at me with these fully white, blank, lifeless eyes. When I finally came to my senses that this wasn't a normal experience, I began to get scared. So, terrified out of my mind and not sure of what else to do, I got up and out of my bed and ran past this entity as fast as I could. The noise would wake my parents up. They would then talk to me and follow me back to my bedroom, but upon arriving, they would see no one. Thinking that I was just having a nightmare or my imagination was running wild in a new environment, they let me sleep on the couch in the living room. I would proceed to sleep there for the next couple weeks until they would ultimately force me back into my bedroom. Following seeing the child, about 4 months or so into living at the house, things took a darker turn, and whatever presence that was within the house seemed to be making things worse. The activity had been becoming more noticeable, drip by drip. We would occasionally hear knocking on the walls, what sounded like items breaking, with there only to be no one there, and no items broken. We had all also began to notice that we felt as if we were being watched at all times. I, for one, distinctly remember my anxiety becoming extremely bad at this time, making it difficult for me to sleep, and when I did manage to go unconscious, I would have horrible dreams. And in these dreams, I was being chased by some abhorrent creature, and usually in the basement. I would always be too scared to look back, and I would be in fight or flight. I would oftentimes wake up dripping in sweat, just as the creature was about to catch me on the stairs. My mom, who had a tendency to hoard things, and this had always been an issue, even at our previous homes, but living here, she seemed to have this behavior greatly intensified. It had been bad before, but it began to reach an entirely new level, and in a short period of time. What I mean by this is cluttering to the point of almost non-movement in our basement, our rooms, and our garage. It became a major problem. Boxes, trash, and junk of all kinds was what it was mostly. And on top of this, she began to impulse buy multiple animals in rapid succession, either buy or acquire from someone who was giving them away. The trash, hoarding, and animals weren't always being let out when they should have been. Definitely began to strain an already strained and dysfunctional marriage. But it seemed like every aspect of our lives was rapidly being magnified and getting worse all the time. With the hoarding both material and animal and the daily fighting, the air became even thicker with anxiety. And the thicker the air became, the more activity we seemed to experience. The sounds, flickers of things out of the corner of our eyes, the persistent nightmares, and the negative environment took its toll on all of us. With my memory not being the greatest, and with trauma also involved, I do my best to tell this as chronologically as I can. One day, shortly after these behaviors had been exacerbated, I remember heading to the basement to get a drink from the fridge that we had down in our laundry room. Funnily enough, it was a Nestea Cool in a can, if any of you guys remember those. And I miss those actually, those were great. Descending the stairs, getting about halfway down, I saw yet another manifestation that shook me to my core. The view as you were headed down the stairs gave a decent view of the basement, like you could see a good chunk of it, and it was here that I witnessed a large wardrobe box being hurled by something that I couldn't see, an invisible force, and it flew from one end of the basement to the other. The bigger boxes tended to be on the left-hand side of our basement, near the extra bedroom that we had down there, and in total it had been thrown about 20 to 25 feet. And mind you, this was a large wardrobe box, so it was full of clothes and God knows what else. So it would have been quite the feat to throw, even if you were a person, let alone, something out of my scope of understanding. So, unable to make rational sense of what I had just witnessed, this had scared me so bad that I ran upstairs and I would refuse to ever go back down there without company ever again. In time, I would find out that I wasn't the only one to have witnessed something strange originating from there. My father and cousin believed that there was something there too, that there was some kind of presence within the house. I don't know all the details of my dad's story, but I do know while he was sleeping in the spare bedroom down there, while him and my mom were particularly on the rocks, that he began to hear voices, like distant whispers that grew louder night after night. These voices seemed to originate from nowhere, but yet they were everywhere. They would force him to question his own sanity. And it's important to note here that my dad isn't schizophrenic or anything of the sort, and he hasn't experienced anything even similar before this or after this. Not too long after this occurred, my dad had another experience, and I'll let him explain it in his own words. Also, as a side note here, my dad's not a professional storyteller, neither is my cousin, so definitely take it easy on them, because they're just recounting their experiences. Thanks.
We moved into a new home in 2002, and it was on the other side of town, so your kids had to change school and all that, and this is like basically a last-ditch effort for your mother and I to try to save our marriage. So it was just, you know the whole story on that part. And we moved in. Inside the house, I had started to experience a dark presence inside the home, something I didn't understand what was going on. It made me angry. I was starting to fill it with this rage. I was just mad, and the situation with your mother and I was deteriorating to the point where, I just didn't want to be around her. I think that it caused an adversarial problem within the home. I remember one night, early morning, I'm trying to remember, the details get a bit fuzzy now about when I was in the bathroom, that one that was right off the hallway, right across down from your room. There was a coat closet right directly across. You remember, Kaylee's room was at the end. And I was looking in the mirror, right, rinsing off my face. Your mother and I had quite the argument earlier, and I was so full of anger. I went to wash my face, and I see something that flashes in my face. I can still remember to this day, is like it lit up, like the mirror lit up from behind, which is impossible because, you know, the lights were off in the bathroom except for a nightlight. And I saw a demonic face, and it roared at me and just scared the living bejesus out of me. It just seemed things to slowly deteriorate within the home. I know that I slept downstairs, and your mother was sleeping upstairs in your room, and I was just mad all the time. I remember being really nice to you kids, of course. I never took it out on you necessarily. I just, you know, wasn't happy, and I felt like a dark, malevolent presence was there in the home. And as time went on, you know, your mother moved out, and Roy moved in, and even him and I were experiencing some issues with the darkness. It was just something about the house just felt evil. Something was not right about it. It just, you know, that weird smell that we'd smell that would disappear for no reason, that smelled like rotten eggs, you had to be gone. The odd things in the garage, you know, the random noises after we cleaned that garage out, the odd things that would happen all the time.
My cousin as well recalled a strange happening that I had forgot about, to be honest, and also had his own experience in the basement, which I'll let him tell in his own words as well.
My first impressions of the house were some of what one would usually expect. It was a new house, so it was unfamiliar, but at the same time, that made it cool. Over the next few years, me and my cousin would spend plenty of days and nights having adventures within and around the confines of that suburban home. But over time, something strange began to emerge behind the wooden panels and carpet. Something that I can only describe as evil. I wasn't exactly the bravest sort. My imagination could run wild and would often find a better way of scaring me than anything else ever could. That being said, things within that house happened which went well beyond the machinations of my fearful mind. The first incident occurred during the daytime. We had been playing a game in the living room when we heard Cody's sister scream from the other room. When we ran in to inspect, we found that a snow globe of hers had broken open without an explanation. I remember this clearly because I had always wondered what kind of liquid was inside a snow globe. I smelled a chemical smell in the air that made me think of nail polish. We set about cleaning up the glass, but never really gave it much thought at the time. It is only later that we realized that we never really asked ourselves, how exactly did the snow globe break? I would recall sleeping on the living room floor, and in the early hours of the morning, I could hear running water, and I would catch a glimpse of the shadowy figure of a man wandering in the kitchen, near the entrance to the basement. Sometimes I would barely remember these moments, like they were just dreams. Other times I would be completely awake and conscious, but would be just too scared to move. At times I would try to make myself believe that it was just my uncle, and it would make it all the more chilling when Cody's dad would finally come in and turn the lights on, and I'd know for certain that the figure was not in fact him at all. The worst and most sinister of the activity, however, was definitely within the basement of the house. Whether during day or night, I felt like even the corners of the rooms hid watchful eyes. I couldn't stand the dark open doorways leading to my uncle's bedroom and the bathroom. The thought of something lurking in the shadows was impossible to banish from my mind. At times, this was so bad that I'd have to cancel sleepovers and call my mom to take me home. The worst of this came during a nightmare I had when I was sleeping in the basement. I found myself alone, the only light coming from a TV in the far corner, flickering with static and white noise. I felt called to walk into my uncle's bedroom and rounded the corner to face the sliding doors to his closet. The closet itself was right beneath the stairs. Trembling, I reached to open the mirrored door panel, only for it to slam open of its own will. In the shadows of the room, I saw a hole in the wall which had mysteriously appeared, a hole that, I might add, did not exist. A terrible being emerged from that hole, one which haunts me to this day. Its skin was charred black like carbon. It was large and bulky like a man, but upon its head were two large and vicious horns which were dark as midnight. Its teeth were sharp as knives and yellow with rot, but its eyes were amber like a predator. It snarled at me, and I awoke again in a cold sweat. After that, I don't believe I ever chose to sleep in that basement again.
Things would only get worse from here, day after day, and night after night. As I had previously mentioned, my mom had purchased a lot of animals. This included cats and dogs. This further added to the filth of the house and the negative atmosphere due to my parents often being depressed and not taking the animals outside as they should have. Long story short, it definitely wasn't an environment that I would ever want my kids to grow up in. And that is something for sure on top of the paranormal that's deeply affected me to this day. So with having dogs and cats as pets, soon out of nowhere, we began to have an insane amount of animal deaths occur. We ended up losing a total of 7 animals altogether within less than 2 months. What were perfectly normal, relatively healthy animals would just pass. And I did want to put a warning here because I'm going to mention a few details about the animal deaths, and I don't want to upset anyone who's sensitive to these kinds of things. So I'll mark the timestamps down in the description of the video if you prefer to fast forward past this. Again, I don't remember all of the details, but when the animals would pass, I would usually assist my dad in burying them. We tended to bury them out back behind my grandparents' house a couple blocks over because they lived next to like a woodland area, like a creek. And we had an area where we tended to bury our family animals back there. And with that being said, these are some of the deaths that really bothered me. We had one, a younger puppy who was a pit bull who had died in our garage. She had had a seizure and she had no prior history of issues as far as we knew. We also checked if she could have gotten into something or ate something that she shouldn't have, but we couldn't find anything. My cat Kara, who actually would go on to live for another 16 years or so after these events, she was an amazing cat. But during this time, she was pregnant and had to have ended up with some kind of an infection, and she prematurely lost her kittens. One night after sleeping in the living room, I actually woke up by rolling over and having my face touch one of them, and its tiny body was ice cold, and that alone was super traumatic. And I don't want to necessarily shade my mom, but my dad was at work when this happened, and I remember her telling me to get rid of them basically, so I had to clean them up. And long story short, I didn't really know what to do. Obviously, I was a kid. I didn't have the capabilities really to be able to take them over to my grandparents' house. So I ended up just putting them in the trash can, and I always regretted doing that. There were multiple others, but those in particular always got to me. My parents would end up getting divorced, and while this was starting to get underway, I was living with my siblings and my dad, still at the Willow House. As I previously said, we lived in a duplex, and our next door neighbors were a family, a husband, wife, and their 3 kids. During this turbulent time, the dad of the family next door seemed to have lost his mind. One afternoon, The dad that was our neighbor was sitting with my dad, and they were having a few drinks on our shared porch with me sitting with them. I distinctly remember him telling my dad that he needed to talk to him about something serious. So my dad asked me to go inside, to which I obliged, so he could talk to him. And what he talked to him about was absolutely insane. He had become extremely paranoid. He believed that his wife was cheating on him, and he asked my dad if he would assist him in helping to kill her and dispose of her body for a sum of money. He even described where he would take her, how it would work, but I don't want to share all those gritty details since, YouTube. But it was shocking. My dad not only was shocked, but he didn't want to add to his paranoia further or risk angering him since he was obviously unhinged. So he calmly refused his offer, and I'll let my dad explain some details here.
We got to know Mike next door a little bit, and he seemed to be an okay guy, and then him and his wife had a brief separation for about a month or 3 weeks, and I saw her at Target. Her name was Lori. That was her name. She was at Target, and she was talking to me, said hi and all that, and she goes, I said, well, are you you and Mike get back together? She goes, I don't know. I just have no idea. So then later on that night, I was off used to be off on Thursdays and Fridays, and I was off it was a Thursday night, and I was hanging out with Mike, and he was drinking, and then he told me how he was going to kill his wife, and he gave it in grave detail how he was going to kill her, and he looked like he was literally seriously possessed. It was like full of black rage. He was so angry. He's like, I'm going to kill her. I'm going to do it in front of her mother. And, she's going to watch and then blah, blah, blah. And I was like, Mike, that's really dark. Why would you want to do something like that? I wanted to fill out a police report, but I didn't think maybe that, people would actually take my word on it. I honestly don't know the whole thing there. She did come back. Lori did come back for a brief. I did talk to her one day. And by then, Mike is just angry all the time, except he seemed to be nice to her for a few minutes. And I'm outside talking to her. And she thought, I just don't know, I'm exhausted. I want, this is a honeymoon period before all the abuse and the physical abuse starts again. And I was like, he physically abuses you? And she's like, yeah. I said, why did you come back? She said she did it for the boys. He pulled up in his car, went inside, and he come out, started screaming at her, saying, how dare you sit out here with this guy, blah, 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 blah. And by then, he knew we were, Roy and I were a couple. And he started screaming at her and telling her, how dare you talk to another man, And then he drug her inside and slammed the door. And then she did permanently move out right before we moved. And he would hide in his garage. You could hear him in there and banging around. And it was just a real weird situation. We'd see him for a few seconds. He'd come inside, slam his door real hard. And you could hear him yelling inside the house. And there was nobody in there. It was just like, it was crazy. I don't know what happened. We moved. When we moved out, things got considerably much better. It took a little bit for the darkness to completely get out of me, but it was a lot of things. You kids saw a lot of things, scary things, bad dreams. It was a lot.
After this happened, roughly I'd say a month or so after, he actually got arrested for attempting to hire a hitman to kill his wife. So whether all of that was related to the dark presence in the house or not, I can't quite say, but it very much could have been. I mean, prior to that conversation, he seemed totally normal and hadn't acted that way before, so it's hard telling. The paranormal activity by this time on our side had become so violent that we all began to sleep together in the living room. Unknown to me at the time, I wasn't the only one that would have this happen. But it seemed like for whatever reason, I would always be woke up around 3 a.m. in an absolute state of terror. Things would often be knocking or moving around us. And I remember the time because we had a cable box that displayed the time in our living room next to our TV. And to kind of help counteract the scariness, I guess, of the environment, of the situation, we would usually play like the Boomerang Network for cartoons. I think we had like Dish TV at the time or something, but it was usually on at that time. After waking up, I would be so scared that I'd be afraid to breathe because it felt like hell itself was descending upon me. I would lay my head to the floor and could hear additional bangs and oftentimes what sounded like glass breaking in the basement below, or things being thrown, or destroyed or mangled. If I managed to gather myself, I would try to wake up anybody that I could, either my dad or my brother or my sister, but I could never manage to do so. It was as if they were in some kind of a coma state. I also knew I wasn't dreaming because I would oftentimes stay awake until the sun came up, way too scared to try and rest. And most of the time, the majority of the banging and the overall noise would cease at dawn. And after talking to my family, I would later find out that this for sure happened to my brother, my sister, and my dad at random times during our lives there, during this particular era. Given all the things we had experienced and been through, it seemed as if whatever presence that dwelled within the house fed off of death and sorrow. When the divorce was finalized, us kids ended up moving out of the house to live with our mom, thus closing a very disturbing chapter in our lives. But little did I know, it would just be the beginning of another. Whatever evil that originated from this house seemed to follow or affect us even after we left. What follows is a series of incredibly terrifying and disturbing events as well, and I'll be sharing those in the next video. I did have a couple of questions having dug up the past in regards to what me and my family have experienced, and this has led me to seek answers. I've tried going through the past of the area, having lived there or near there the majority of my life, and I couldn't really find anything that could have directly caused the haunting as far as tragic events or what have you, historic events. The area does contain old Indian burial grounds, but it's nearly impossible to figure out where exactly those would be. The home, or rather the duplex, if I were to guess, from the dated wood paneling and the carpet at the time, was probably built in the 1960s or 70s. It was a rental, so it's also impossible to find out who the past tenants were or the previous owners. I don't know exactly who owns the property now, and I think it's transferred hands or companies multiple times. I am just curious who has lived there in the past and what they maybe could have been into, whether it was some kind of occultism or Luciferianism, if it could have contributed to what was there. And let's say that no one was involved in anything dark or magic related that could have conjured something up. These entities, in my opinion, lurk around us and are attracted to negativity like moths to a flame. They seem to feed off of our emotions, like spiritual ticks or vampires. I also have heard and can somewhat confirm, given my life, that hoarding and overall not taking care of your environment or self, by extension your family, can potentially be a breeding ground for these things as well. This is just speculation on my part to try and make sense of what we endured over the couple years that we lived there at the house. I do oftentimes end up driving past it, especially headed back home from the gym at night, because I live in a town that's relatively close to where this all took place, and it still has a very eerie vibe to me. But there are people who currently live there, and over the years there's been a revolving door of people who have lived there, and I'm just curious if the past or current residents have experienced anything paranormal like we did, or if we were haunted instead of the house, or by having lived in the house and had been followed as a result, that maybe the house wasn't haunted anymore. Lots of questions that perhaps I'll never have answers to, but these things did happen. They did fundamentally change me, and they helped shape my interest in the paranormal and the spiritual world as a whole. I'll be diving more so into why I started Mystery Archives on part 2, and in part 2, I'll be telling what took place after we left the Willow House. I have a few experiences post what I'll talk about in part 2, so maybe there'll be a part 3. I'm honestly not sure yet. I did also speak with my mom and my sister, and they didn't want to be included in this video for their own reasons, and I totally respect that. My little brother has some experiences, but those will be relayed in part 2 at the next home that we ended up at. because although he may have had some experiences, he doesn't recall because he was like between ages 2 and 4 when all this took place at the Willow House. I know I tease the stories a lot, and overall I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about what I've experienced. If you have any questions, I'd love to read and answer them in the comments below. There are definitely a lot of details that I don't remember, whether I've blocked them out or it's just too fuzzy with time. And for that, I apologize, but I will do my best to answer your questions and respond to your comments. Another interesting fact about this story of mine in particular, this era, as I like to call them, I kind of categorize them in that way, I guess, in my own mind, is that it was going to be on the first season of a popular paranormal Netflix series, but they pulled my opportunity last minute because I apparently wasn't diverse enough, whatever that means. Then they called me for season 2 and then just stopped responding to me after I said I wanted to mention Mystery Archives. And apparently they weren't cool with that, but it is what it is. It's a good show, but I've come to this conviction quite some time ago, having dealt with a lot of really good and a lot of really bad people just kind of in the paranormal sphere. And you can't always trust people, unfortunately. Sometimes they're just in it for themselves or the money or what have you, especially these days. So that unfortunately was one of those experiences that kind of negatively reinforced how I felt. But with that being said, please leave the video a like if you liked it, subscribe with notifications if you haven't already, and please share this video around to help us reach as many people as we possibly can. Maybe we can not only help reach someone who's had a similar experience, who maybe wants to also share their story, but it also helps keep me going. Since for whatever reason, views have been down, they've been at like an all-time low, really. But regardless of that, regardless of how well the video does, it's been very cathartic for me to talk about these things and to tell my stories to such an incredible group of people that is the Mystery Archives community. Also, I think for my own sake, to be able to kind of, I guess, more or less come to terms with digging up the past and kind of trying to categorize everything chronologically and remember everything that took place. It's kind of why I'm breaking it up into parts and to try to do my own stories justice. So I hope you guys understand. Anyways, I love you guys. Thank you for not only showing interest in my experiences, but supporting me and all of the cases that I've covered thus far. I also have some big plans and announcements to make, but I'll go ahead and save those for part 2 as well, which I should be able to get out in the next week or so. As always, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there and take care. I'll see you next time.